Under the moonlight, a single name echoed through the trees, louder than any of the forest's whispers. Aria. Her heart slammed against her ribs as if it had just been awakened from a deep slumber, and with each beat, it reminded her of the undeniable truth: she was bound to him, whether he remembered it or not. The Blood Moon Gala, with its opulent guests and sparkling chandeliers, had never been a place for someone like Aria. She didn't belong among the nobility of Wintercrest, especially not with the dark mark on her soul that told her exactly where she stood. But that night, everything changed. A moment before her world fractured forever, she stood in the corner of the ballroom, invisible yet yearning. A borrowed gown clung to her body, its fabric not fit for someone who had never known the comfort of wealth, but she wore it like armor. She could hear the soft murmur of laughter, the clink of wine glasses, but nothing held her attention except the eyes of one man. Rylan Thornhart. The Alpha Heir. His presence was more than just a physical one. It was an aura, a force that seemed to pull everything toward him, even the night itself. His golden hair fell perfectly over his eyes, and his jaw was set with the kind of determination that made others tremble. He was the epitome of power, and as he moved through the crowd, every person seemed to part for him. But it wasn't his power that caught her attention, it was his eyes. Eyes that locked onto hers the moment he entered the room, making her breath catch in her throat. For a heartbeat, the world stilled, and in that silence Aria's instincts screamed. It wasn't just a passing glance. It was the kind of look that could strip away years of loneliness, of heartbreak. It was the look of a man who had just found something he wasn't sure he was looking for, and it sent a thrill of terror through her. His wolf had recognized her before he even had the chance to. Their souls had intertwined in the shadows of the night, and neither could escape. Yet, she was still no more than a nobody. An Omega. His family would never accept her. He'd never accept her. But the night wasn't done with her yet. Not by a long shot. The crowd parted as Rylan approached, his eyes never leaving hers. With a single, unspoken command, he led her toward the center of the ballroom. The space around them cleared as the music shifted into something slower, something deeper. Without thinking, she followed. She had no choice. And then, before she could process the surrealness of it all, his hand found hers, guiding her gently into the ceremonial circle, his touch both commanding and soft. The air around them crackled with something ancient, something primal. And in a single breath, everything changed. The moment his teeth sank into her skin, marking her, branding her as his, she felt it, deep down, in the marrow of her bones. It was a bond, undeniable and unbreakable. The world around them faded into nothingness, and in the space between one breath and the next, they became something more than just two people. They were two halves of a whole. But then, the moon above them blazed even brighter. And when the first rays of morning light touched the horizon, Rylan was gone. Not in body, no, he stood there before her, but in mind. The curse had taken hold. And when he opened his eyes, there was no recognition. No warmth. No spark. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cold, his gaze distant. She froze, the words dying in her throat. How could he not remember? How could the man who had claimed her in the dark, under the light of the blood moon, forget her so easily? "Why are you here?" he continued, his voice rising with confusion. The mark burned on her skin. But it was no longer the sweet sensation of their bond. It was a scar. A wound that would never heal. The council's words fell on her like stones, each accusation more biting than the last. Betrayal. Lies. She had been nothing but an illusion to them all. And to Rylan? She was nothing but a mistake. Leave, the council commanded. As the guards dragged her away, she screamed, "Ask your wolf!" But it was no use. Rylan's eyes had already turned away. The gates of Wintercrest closed behind her, the world she once thought she belonged to forever shut off from her. She had been marked by him. She had been chosen. And yet, she was nothing. But it wasn't over. The bond still burned beneath her skin, an ache that never left. Every step she took in exile, her heart beat with the rhythm of a bond that refused to break. And she hated it. She hated that it still existed, that her soul still reached out for him even though he had forgotten. She hated that her wolf mourned, longed, and waited for him, knowing that he would never come for her again. As the years passed, Aria learned how to survive. The wilderness became her home. She became a healer, using the skills she had learned in her childhood, helping those who were lost or in need. It was the only way to dull the ache inside her chest, the longing for something she could never have. Something that had been ripped away from her the moment Rylan turned his back. But even as she helped others, she couldn't escape the truth. Rylan was dying. She knew it. The rumors had reached her in the distant edges of the world. The great Alpha heir, the ruler of Wintercrest, was no longer the man he once was. His wolf was unstable. He was weakening. His instincts were failing him. And deep down, Aria knew the reason. His soul was fractured. His bond with her had been severed, and without her, he was incomplete. He was broken. That was the truth. She had been his fated mate. The one who was meant to complete him. But he had forgotten her. And in doing so, he had cursed them both. Yet, despite everything, despite the pain, despite the distance, despite the betrayal, Aria couldn't stop thinking about him. Even now, the bond still burned, refusing to fade. And as the years stretched on, she knew this, fate had a way of bringing things back full circle. And then, the message arrived. He was coming for her. The night Rylan's message arrived, Aria knew that fate had once again spun its web, pulling her closer to him, whether she was ready or not. She had been alone for so long, surviving in the wilderness, far from Wintercrest's gilded walls, far from the world that had rejected her. But even in the quiet, even in the peace of her isolation, she couldn't escape the memory of him. It haunted her, his touch, the way he marked her under the moon, the brief moment of connection before the curse ripped it all away. For years, she had kept moving, buried her emotions beneath layers of survival instincts, tried to convince herself that she was better off without him. She had to be. After all, what was a bond if it meant nothing to him? If it was just a fleeting mistake? But as the message reached her, her heart began to race. The message wasn't just a letter, it was an invitation. From him. Aria Vale, the letter read. I need your help. Come to Wintercrest. I won't leave until I see you. She could hardly breathe as she read the words. The message had been delivered by one of Rylan's men, a warrior who looked at her as if she were a ghost, a relic from a past that had long since been forgotten. And yet, she knew the truth. He had sent for her. 100 emotions tore through her. Anger, fear, confusion. But most of all, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she had been waiting for. But it wasn't a simple invitation. It was a plea. A cry for help. She couldn't ignore it. Even though the last time she had seen Rylan, he had forgotten her completely, even though every fiber of her being had wanted to forget him, she knew she couldn't. The bond between them was too strong, too raw. It had survived years of separation, years of pain. And now, he was calling for her. That night, the wind howled through the trees as Aria prepared for the journey. She packed light, just the essentials, a few herbs for healing, a knife, and a worn map that she had carried with her for years. The ink faded from the places she had marked. Her heart raced as she gathered her things. There was no turning back now. The message from Rylan had shattered the world she had built for herself in the wilderness, and there was no way to rebuild it. Not now. The journey was long, the road winding and treacherous, but Aria was no stranger to hardship. She had lived through worse. But this? This was something different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about facing the ghosts of the past, the memories she had buried deep, and the future that seemed as uncertain as ever. Soon after, she found herself standing at the edge of Wintercrest's gates. The grand stone walls loomed over her, a reminder of everything she had lost. She couldn't remember the last time she had stepped inside, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of the castle's halls both comforting and suffocating. She had once dreamed of being here, of being by his side, of being more than just an orphan Omega. But those dreams had been dashed the moment he had forgotten her. Now, all she had was the memory of that one night. And the weight of the mark that still burned beneath her skin. As she walked through the halls, her pulse quickened with every step. She had no idea what she would find when she saw him again. Would he remember? Would he even want to? But it wasn't just about Rylan anymore. There was a part of her that had longed for this moment. A part of her that had never truly let him go, even though she had tried to move on. That part of her was alive again, waking from the long sleep of exile. The doors to the war room opened with a creak, and there he was. Rylan. He was standing at the far side of the room, his back turned to her, staring out the window as if he were deep in thought. The moment her gaze fell on him, it was as if the world shifted, and everything around her became hazy, blurred. His presence consumed the room, and she could feel the pull of the bond deep in her bones. It was him. But it wasn't. His posture was tense, his shoulders broad, still carrying the weight of his position as the alpha heir. But his eyes, they were different. There was something lost in them. A shadow, as if he were searching for something, but couldn't quite remember what it was. She stepped forward, the sound of her footsteps betraying her presence. Slowly, he turned, his gaze locking with hers. And for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. A recognition? A flicker of a memory that he couldn't quite place? Aria? His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it in days. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All the emotions, all the years of pain and longing, came rushing back, and she couldn't find a way to say what she needed to say. She had waited for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. "Do you remember me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His brow furrowed in confusion, and he shook his head. I don't know." Her heart shattered at the words. He didn't remember her. Not at all. But his wolf? His wolf still recognized her. And that's when it hit her, the bond wasn't just between them. It was between the wolves, too. Without another word, he stepped closer to her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place. His wolf's presence grew stronger, almost suffocating in its intensity. And then, just as quickly as the moment had begun, it was gone. Rylan stepped back, his expression returning to the cold, distant mask he wore so well. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice firm, but not without a hint of hesitation. "Then why did you send for me?" she asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. His eyes met hers again, and for the briefest moment, she saw it. The truth. He hadn't sent for her out of obligation. There was something deeper, something his heart refused to acknowledge. "I don't know," he replied quietly, his gaze drifting away once more. "But now that you're here, I don't know what to do." A part of her wanted to scream at him, to make him remember. But she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded, as if this moment had been inevitable all along. "I'll help you," she said, her voice stronger now, even though her heart ached with the weight of his words. "But you need to understand something, Rylan. This curse? It's not just a curse on you. It's a curse on both of us." His eyes flicked back to her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed to understand. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. But before either could speak again, the doors to the war room opened, and a voice interrupted them. "Rylan, there's something you need to know." The voice trailed off as the man who had entered stopped dead in his tracks, his gaze shifting from Rylan to Aria, and then back again. Rylan's expression hardened. "What is it?" The man's face was grim. "There's been a breach. Someone has entered the territory." Aria's blood ran cold as she realized what it meant. The past was coming for them. The moment the door creaked open, Aria felt the weight of the world settle upon her shoulders. She hadn't expected it to happen like this, hadn't expected him to be the one standing in front of her, still holding the memories of their bond and yet unable to remember her. For a fleeting second, she felt the ache of her past, the past where they had been everything to each other. He had marked her, and in doing so, claimed her as his own. But now? Now, he didn't even remember her name. His eyes searched her face, blank, as though he had never known the woman standing before him. Her heart twisted in her chest, and she swallowed down the lump in her throat. She had come all this way, endured the years of waiting, only to find him standing before her as a stranger. Yet the connection, the bond between them, was undeniable. "I don't understand," Rylan murmured, his voice ragged with confusion. "Why are you here?" She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, a flood of emotions rose up, threatening to choke her. Anger. Betrayal. Longing. Love. It was all there, swarming beneath the surface, a tidal wave of raw feelings that threatened to consume her. Why had she come? Why had she thought, even for a moment, that he might remember her? That he might see her as more than just a fleeting moment in his life? That he might remember the way her heart had beat in sync with his under the full moon? But instead, she was just another face to him. Just another nameless girl lost in the sea of the Wintercrest legacy. "I'm here because you called for me," Aria finally said, her voice quieter than she intended. "You sent for me." His gaze flickered to the letter in her hand, the one she had read 100 times on her journey here, the one that had sparked this reunion, this reawakening. She hadn't known what to expect, but she certainly hadn't expected this. A man who barely recognized her. A man who had once been everything to her. He took a step closer, his presence filling the room. His aura was overwhelming, suffocating even. And yet, Aria couldn't bring herself to step away. There was something in his eyes, something that screamed that he knew, even if his mind refused to accept it. His wolf knew. She could feel it in the air, that pull between them, a magnetic force that neither of them could escape. But Rylan was a man of control, a man who had never once lost sight of his responsibilities. And yet, with her standing before him, so close, so painfully present, something inside of him shifted. "I don't even know what to say," Rylan admitted, his voice tight with frustration. Aria's chest tightened as she looked up at him, trying to find the right words. How could she explain the pain of being marked and forgotten? How could she put into words the ache that had never left her? She had thought time would heal the wound, but instead, it had only made it fester. "Then don't say anything," she whispered. "Just listen." Her words hung in the air between them, the weight of her vulnerability thick and palpable. He stood there, his eyes fixed on hers, waiting. "Do you remember the night of the blood moon?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Do you remember what happened between us?" Rylan's eyes flickered, but the blankness remained. "I remember the marking," he said slowly. "But not you." The words struck her like a blow, and she fought to keep her composure. She couldn't let him see how much that hurt. She couldn't let him see how deeply it had scarred her to be forgotten so easily. But deep down, she knew she would never truly be free of this. The mark on her skin, his mark, was permanent, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't wash it away. "I was yours, Rylan," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "And you were mine." His gaze softened, but there was something distant in it, something that told her he didn't truly understand. He couldn't. He was broken, they were broken, and all the years of longing, of pain, couldn't be erased with a few words. "I can feel it," he admitted quietly, his voice strained. "The bond, it's there. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to undo what was done." Aria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside her. She had tried to bury it all, the hurt, the longing, the betrayal, but now it was all flooding back. Every moment they had shared, every touch, every kiss, every breath they had taken together. And in the silence that followed, she felt the pull of the bond once again, a pull she couldn't escape, no matter how much she wanted to. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said softly. "I'm asking you to remember." Rylan's jaw clenched as he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the frustration in his eyes. He didn't know what to do with her. Didn't know what to do with the feelings that were stirring inside of him. "I can't just force myself to remember," he said, a note of helplessness creeping into his voice. "I don't even know what you mean to me." How can I? You marked me, Aria interrupted, her voice rising. You claimed me, Rylan. And I've carried this, with me all these years. You can't pretend it never happened. His expression faltered, and for a brief moment, she saw the man he had once been. The man who had held her in his arms, who had shared his heart with hers, who had made her feel like she was everything. But that man was lost. Gone. And in his place was a stranger, a man bound by duty and cursed by a past he couldn't remember. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with you, he muttered, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I don't know how to fix this. Aria took a step forward, her gaze never leaving his. Maybe you don't need to fix it, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe we just need to be honest. With ourselves. With each other. The words hung in the air between them, a moment of fragile hope in the midst of everything that had gone wrong. Rylan's eyes darkened, and for the first time, she saw something in them, something raw, something real. And in that moment, Aria knew that she was not alone in this. He might not remember her, but he felt it too. The bond, the connection, the love, was still there, deep down, hidden beneath the layers of guilt and fear. I've never known how to do this, he confessed, his voice rough. I've never known how to love someone like this. Aria's heart ached as she watched him. He was so lost, so broken, and she wanted nothing more than to hold him, to make him see what she had always known, that they were meant to be together. But as the silence stretched between them, the weight of their shared history, their shared pain, pressed down on them both. We can't change what's been done, Aria said softly. But we can decide what happens next. Together. Rylan looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if he were trying to find something, a thread, a spark, that would guide him through the darkness. And in that moment, Aria knew that, despite everything, she had given him the only thing she had left, the chance to remember her. The chance to see her. She had nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The bond pulsed between them, a reminder of everything they had lost, and everything they could still find. But before either of them could speak, the door burst open again, and a voice echoed from the hallway. Rylan, there's a problem. We need to. The man froze in the doorway, his eyes flicking between Rylan and Aria. Rylan's expression hardened immediately. I'll be there in a moment, he said sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man nodded and quickly retreated, leaving the two of them alone once again. Aria took a deep breath, her heart still racing, the intensity of the moment lingering in the air. Rylan turned back to her, his gaze softening. We'll figure this out, he said quietly. I promise. But Aria knew that the road ahead would be far from simple. Their past had been shattered, their future uncertain. But as she stood there, staring at the man who had once been hers, she couldn't help but believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The bond still pulsed between them, stronger than ever. And for the first time in years, Aria felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared to hope for. A future. Together. Aria couldn't remember the last time she felt truly alive. Not since that night, the night of the blood moon, when her world had shifted so violently, so irrevocably, that she couldn't find her way back to who she was before. Rylan's memory might have been wiped clean, but hers? Hers was crystal clear. The scent of him still clung to her skin, and the taste of his kiss still lingered in her mind like a forbidden fruit, just out of reach. But now, standing here before him, she wasn't sure where she belonged. The past weighed heavy on her heart, and the future felt like an impossible maze. He had come for her. He had finally sent for her, but in doing so, he had opened a floodgate of emotions that she wasn't prepared to face. The bond between them had never faded, it had only grown more intense, more desperate, as the years passed. But Rylan was still a stranger. The man she had loved so deeply was no longer the same. "I can't forget it," Aria whispered, her voice breaking the silence that had enveloped them since the doors had closed behind the servant who had interrupted their moment. "I can't forget us." Rylan's eyes softened, a flicker of something deep within them. But it was fleeting, replaced almost immediately by the cold detachment that had become his armor. She hated it. Hated the distance he kept from her, even though everything inside her screamed to pull him closer. "You don't have to," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "You don't have to forget." And yet, it felt like that's exactly what he wanted. She could see it in the way he kept his distance, and the way his eyes darted away whenever their gazes met. He wasn't ready to face this. He wasn't ready to remember. He wasn't ready to confront the truth about what they had been, and what they still could be. "Then why did you forget me?" Aria's voice was soft but laced with years of pain. The question had been burning inside her for so long, but she had never had the courage to ask it before. Now, standing in front of him, she realized just how badly she needed an answer. "I don't know," Rylan said, the words coming out strained. "I wish I did. I wish I could tell you everything." She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had waited for this. She had waited for him to look at her like he used to. For him to remember her, the way she remembered him. But in the years of separation, something had changed. And she couldn't help but wonder if he would ever truly return to her. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. It was as if the years of pain and unspoken words had built an impenetrable wall between them, one that neither of them knew how to tear down. Aria didn't know if she was strong enough to face the truth, his truth, especially if it meant that what they had once shared was truly gone. "I don't want to hurt you," Rylan said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to be the reason you suffer." "But you already are," Aria replied, her voice filled with the raw honesty she had been hiding for so long. "You already are, Rylan. The bond between us, it's still there, even though you don't remember. I feel it. And so do you." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "I can't give you something I don't understand. I can't give you something I don't remember." "Then let me help you remember," Aria said, her voice trembling. "Let me help you find your way back to me." His gaze flicked up to meet hers, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of hope, of desire, that made her heart race. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask he wore so well. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. Aria felt the sting of his words like a slap to the face. She had come all this way, braved the pain and the heartache, only to be met with this uncertainty, this doubt. And yet, despite it all, she couldn't bring herself to give up. Not now. Not when she could still feel him so clearly in the depths of her soul. "I won't give up on you," she said quietly, but with more determination than she had ever felt in her life. Not now. Not ever. The words hung in the air between them, a promise, a vow. And even though Rylan didn't speak, she could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. Something he was afraid to face. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I never did." Aria stepped forward, closing the space between them. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her touch. "Then let me remind you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "Let me remind you why you do deserve me. Because I've never stopped loving you, Rylan. I've never stopped believing in us." The words felt like a balm on the wound that had festered for so long, and for the first time since she had arrived, Aria felt the tiniest glimmer of hope. Maybe they could fix this. Maybe they could rebuild what had been broken. But then, just as quickly, doubt crept in again. What if she was wrong? What if, despite everything, Rylan was too far gone to come back to her? What if he had forgotten everything they had shared? Before she could voice her doubts, Rylan's hands moved to her waist, pulling her toward him with a desperation that caught her off guard. His lips crashed against hers in a kiss that was raw, unrestrained, a kiss that was equal parts longing and need. It wasn't the gentle, careful kiss of a stranger. It was the kiss of someone who had been starved for something real, for something that he hadn't been able to find, even in the years of separation. Aria's heart soared in her chest, and before she could stop herself, her hands found their way to his hair, tangling in the dark strands as she pulled him closer. The world around them seemed to disappear, and all that mattered was the press of his lips against hers, the heat of his body against hers, the feeling of his soul reaching for hers once again. But just as quickly as the moment had started, it ended. Rylan pulled back, his eyes wild with a mixture of confusion and longing. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you do that?" "Because I can't pretend anymore," Aria said, her voice trembling but steady. "I can't pretend that I don't still love you, that I don't still want this, us." Rylan's expression faltered, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. But it was gone before she could fully recognize it, and once again, he stepped back, putting distance between them. "I can't give you what you want," he said, his voice quieter now. "I can't promise you anything, Aria. Not until I understand what's happening between us." She took a deep breath, willing herself to remain composed. She had come this far, had braved the memories, the pain, and the longing. She wasn't going to back down now. "Then let me help you understand," she said softly, her voice steady. "Let me help you remember what we were. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way back to each other." Rylan hesitated, his eyes flickering with something uncertain, something raw. And for a moment, it felt like the entire world stood still, waiting for him to make a choice. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll try." Aria nodded, her heart swelling with hope. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed. As she stood there, facing him, she knew one thing for certain: this was far from over. There was still so much between them, so much they needed to face. But in that moment, with the bond between them pulsing stronger than ever, Aria felt the first stirrings of something she had almost given up on. Love. Real love. And no matter how difficult it would be, she would fight for it. For him. Aria didn't expect the world to change in an instant, but it did. In the blink of an eye, everything she thought she knew about herself, about Rylan, about love itself, was shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was like stepping into a dream, only to realize that the dream wasn't hers to begin with. The bond had always been there, but now, with every passing moment, it felt as though something was slipping away. The darkness she had spent years running from was finally catching up to her, and this time, she couldn't outrun it. Rylan's words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I can't promise you anything, Aria. Not until I understand what's happening between us. He had said he would try. But what if that wasn't enough? What if his efforts were doomed from the start? What if the curse, the one that had shattered their world in the first place, was stronger than any love they could share? The days following their last meeting felt like a haze. Rylan was distant, lost in his own thoughts. He was trying to understand, to unravel the confusion that haunted him. But the more he pushed, the further he seemed to drift away. Aria felt it in her bones. The gap between them was widening, and there was nothing she could do to bridge it. She found herself standing outside his door again, this time with more resolve. She wasn't going to walk away. She wasn't going to give up on them, not now, not when they were so close to something real. But as her hand hovered over the door, she felt a chill race down her spine. Something wasn't right. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were screaming at her. Without thinking, she pushed the door open, heart pounding in her chest. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Rylan stood by the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides. There was an energy in the room, a heaviness that seemed to crush the air around them. And then she heard it, the low, guttural growl, a sound that rumbled from deep within his chest, something primal, something dangerous. Rylan? Aria's voice trembled as she took a tentative step into the room. What's happening? He turned to face her, but it wasn't the Rylan she knew. His eyes were dark, filled with an intensity she had never seen before. A sharp, predatory edge that sent a jolt of fear through her. His gaze swept over her, hungry, possessive, and for a moment, she wondered if he could see straight through her. I can't control it, he muttered, his voice strained. The wolf, it's restless. Aria's heart slammed against her ribs as she moved closer, instinctively reaching for him. What do you mean? What's going on? I don't know, he growled. I don't know what's happening to me. But every time I'm near you, I feel it. The pull. The need. He paused, his breath shallow. It's like I'm losing control. And I can't. I can't lose you again. I won't. Aria's breath hitched. He was terrified. He was afraid of himself, of the very thing that had always bound them together. The wolf, the bond, they weren't just part of him, they were him. But he was losing his grip on it. And she didn't know if she could save him. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his skin. He was burning, his body radiating heat, and for a moment, she could feel the weight of everything between them. The love. The curse. The years they had lost. Rylan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're not losing me. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But as soon as the words left her lips, a sharp pain shot through her chest. It was like something had pierced her heart, a deep, searing ache that left her breathless. She stumbled back, clutching her chest as the world around her began to tilt. "What's happening?" she gasped, panic rising in her throat. The bond between them, it was too strong. Something was wrong. Something was unraveling. Rylan's eyes widened in shock. "Aria! What's wrong? What's happening to you?" I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It hurts, Rylan. It's too much." He rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he reached out to steady her. But as he touched her, she felt the connection between them flare to life. It was like a spark igniting a fire, but the fire wasn't warm. It was consuming. "Let go," Rylan whispered urgently, his voice barely above a breath. "You have to let go, Aria. The bond, it's too much for you. If we don't control it, we'll both be lost." "I can't," she gasped, her chest tightening with every passing second. "I can't let go. Not again." The pain intensified, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything around her blurred. Her vision dimmed, and for a split second, she thought she might pass out. But then, just as suddenly, the pain stopped. The world righted itself, and Aria collapsed into Rylan's arms, exhausted and shaken. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Aria closed her eyes, her heart still racing, but the bond between them, the bond, was still there, still pulsing beneath her skin. She had never felt anything like this before. It was overwhelming, all-consuming, and yet, it was also the most real thing she had ever experienced. "We have to find a way to control it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can't keep doing this. We can't keep hurting each other." Rylan pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her protectively. I know. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to control the wolf, how to control us." "I'll help you," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll figure this out together. We've been through too much to give up now." Rylan's grip on her tightened, his body trembling. "I don't know if I can promise you anything, Aria. I don't know if I can promise you that I'll be able to control this thing inside me." Aria's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words sinking in. The curse, the one that had always hung over them, was stronger than they both realized. And the more they fought it, the harder it seemed to break free. But Aria wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not when they were so close. "I'm not asking you to promise me anything," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "I'm just asking you to try." Rylan's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place, but it was enough. It was a spark of hope, a flicker of something real beneath all the confusion and pain. "I'll try," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll try, Aria. For you." The tension in the room eased just slightly, but the danger was still there, lingering between them. The wolf, his wolf, was still restless. And Aria knew that, no matter how much they tried to deny it, their love was never going to be simple. It was always going to be complicated, dangerous, and uncertain. But that was the price they paid for the bond they shared. The night passed in silence, both of them lost in their thoughts, but there was a flicker of something new in the air. Something real. The bond between them wasn't gone. It was still there, pulsing with life, with power, with love. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to navigate the storm that was brewing. But as the moon rose higher in the sky, a voice whispered in the darkness, a voice Aria knew all too well. "I'll be back for you, Aria. You can't escape the bond. You can't escape me." The chill that ran down her spine wasn't from the cold. It was the voice of the past, the voice of the curse that had haunted them both for so long. And for the first time, Aria realized just how far they would have to go to break free. The night was heavy with expectation, the air thick with the promise of change. Aria stood on the precipice of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She could feel the pull of the bond growing stronger between her and Rylan, but she also knew that every step she took would lead them deeper into the storm that had been brewing ever since their fates collided. Rylan's presence lingered in the room, the heat of his body just a step behind her, a shadow she couldn't escape. She knew he was there, watching her with a quiet intensity that left her heart racing. But the truth of them, hung in the balance. They both knew it. They both felt it. And yet, nothing could have prepared her for the storm that would come crashing down next. The wolf's voice, gravelly, primal, was louder now in her mind, in her heart. It wasn't just Rylan. It was the curse. The very thing that had kept them apart for so long. And the worst part? It was growing stronger, more insistent. "You don't have to do this," she whispered to herself, not sure who she was trying to convince. The world outside the window seemed distant, far away from the war that raged inside her. Every moment with Rylan now felt like they were standing at the edge of something dangerous, something they could not control. The closer they came to understanding the bond, the more they realized that the truth was slipping further and further from their grasp. And in that moment, as the moonlight poured through the curtains, Rylan stepped forward, his presence swallowing the space between them. His scent was intoxicating, a mix of wild earth and untamed power. He was a force, undeniable, and Aria couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of his presence. "I don't want to lose you," Rylan said, his voice so quiet it felt like a confession. He was so close now, his breath brushing against her skin, sending chills down her spine. Aria closed her eyes, willing herself not to crumble under the intensity of the moment. But how could she fight it? How could she ignore the way her body reacted to him, the way his presence consumed her? "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered back, her voice shaking. "But I can't keep fighting this. I can't keep pretending that I'm strong enough to carry this burden alone." Rylan's hand reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek, his touch gentle, but there was a fire beneath it that burned through her. "You're not alone, Aria. Not anymore. I'll fight for us. I'll fight for you." The weight of his words settled into her chest, but there was a flicker of doubt. She had heard these words before, in dreams, in whispered promises. But dreams had a way of unraveling. And the reality? It was far messier than anything she could have imagined. "Do you even know what you're asking of me?" Aria's voice broke, her heart racing in her chest. "Do you know what it feels like to have this bond, to feel it burn beneath your skin every second of every day?" Rylan's expression faltered for the briefest moment, and Aria could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The curse was more than a bond, it was a chain. And the more they tried to fight it, the stronger it became. He took a step back, his breath coming in shallow bursts, as if the air itself was too thick to breathe. Aria watched him, her heart torn between the love she felt for him and the fear that clung to her like a second skin. "I know what it feels like to want you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know what it feels like to need you. But the curse, it's not just in my mind, Aria. It's in my soul. It's in my blood." She nodded, the truth of his words sinking deep into her. She had always known it. The bond wasn't just a connection, it was a force, one that could tear them apart just as easily as it could bring them together. And in that moment, she realized something. It wasn't just Rylan who was trapped. It was both of them. They were two halves of the same broken whole, and neither of them knew how to fix it. "Then what do we do?" Aria's voice was barely above a whisper, her heart a mixture of hope and resignation. "How do we fight this curse? How do we break it?" Rylan's gaze softened, but there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. "We can't fight it. We can't break it. Not until we understand it." The weight of his words hit her like a slap. She had known, deep down, that there were no easy answers. But hearing it from him, hearing him admit that they were powerless, that was a different kind of devastation. "So we just accept it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We just let the curse tear us apart again?" "No," Rylan said, his voice hardening, his hand gripping hers with a desperate strength. "We fight. But we fight it together. We face the darkness, Aria. And we find a way to survive it." But Aria wasn't so sure. She had seen what the curse could do. She had lived it, felt it tear her apart. And now, it seemed like the only way forward was to face something she couldn't understand, something that could destroy everything she had fought for. And yet, there was Rylan. There was him, standing in front of her, offering her the one thing she had always wanted, hope. But how could they hope when the odds were stacked against them? The questions lingered in the air between them, unanswered and hanging like a storm cloud on the horizon. But there was no time to linger, no time to dwell. They had come too far to turn back now. The bond, the curse, it was a part of them, and it wasn't something they could run from anymore. Aria looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love, fear, and uncertainty. "Then let's fight. Together." Rylan's eyes softened, and in that moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with. Not the cold, distant alpha heir, but the broken, vulnerable man who was still fighting, still hoping, even in the face of the impossible. "Together," he whispered, his voice barely audible. And just like that, everything shifted. The bond between them flared, hot and pulsing with life, and for the first time since that fateful night, Aria felt a flicker of peace in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was enough to keep her going. But as the moonlight bathed the room in silver, a shadow moved in the distance, a whisper of something darker, something dangerous, following them. And Aria knew, without a doubt, that the battle was far from over. The curse had never been fully broken. And neither had they. Rylan felt the air shift, his heart thrumming in his chest as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting for him. His grip tightened around Aria's hand, and despite the chaos swirling inside him, there was a stillness he couldn't ignore, a quiet tug toward her. She was the anchor that kept him tethered to a reality that no longer made sense. The curse had haunted him for so long, weaving its dark threads through every aspect of his life, and now, it was about to unravel everything he had fought for. He could feel the weight of it settling over him, a shadow that threatened to swallow the light that had begun to shine through the cracks. He looked at Aria, the woman who had always been there, even when he had forgotten her, even when he had hurt her without knowing. Her presence, even now, was like a balm to his battered soul, soothing the wounds he had never dared to acknowledge. And yet, as much as he wanted to hold on to that feeling, he knew that there was something darker waiting for them. The curse wasn't finished. It was far from it. And no matter how much they fought it, it would always find a way back. "I'm not strong enough to protect you," Rylan whispered, his voice low, almost breaking. "Not from this. Not from the curse." Aria stepped closer, her eyes searching his, her heart so open, so raw that it felt like it could burst from the intensity of what they shared. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "And I'm not afraid of whatever comes next. As long as we face it together." But even as the words left her lips, a deep sense of dread crept into her bones, something she couldn't explain. The bond between them was still pulsing, still alive, and she could feel the pressure building inside her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. Something was about to break, and she feared it wouldn't be the curse. It might just be her. "I've never been this scared in my life, Aria," Rylan admitted, his eyes dark with guilt. "Not for myself, but for you. The curse, it wants to tear us apart. And I don't know if I can keep you safe." "You're not the only one scared," she replied softly, brushing her thumb across the back of his hand, trying to ground him, to remind him of what they had. "I don't know how we're supposed to fight this. But I know one thing, Rylan, when we're together, nothing else matters. Not the curse, not the past. Just you. Just us." Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread that connected them in the storm of uncertainty. But just as Rylan opened his mouth to speak, the door to the room crashed open, a gust of wind that felt too cold, too dangerous. And then, there he stood. The man who had always been a shadow in their lives, the one who had set everything in motion. The Alpha. The one who had cursed them both. "You thought you could escape me, Rylan?" His voice was like ice, sharp and cutting, a reminder of the power he wielded. "You thought you could outrun the curse?" Rylan's body tensed, his jaw clenched in frustration, anger, and something else, something darker that Aria couldn't quite place. "It's over," Rylan growled, stepping in front of Aria, his protective instincts kicking in. "I won't let you control us anymore." But the man, no, the monster, smiled, the cruel twist of his lips a sign of the torment he was about to unleash. "Oh, it's far from over, Rylan," the Alpha said, his eyes locking onto Aria with an unsettling hunger. "In fact, it's only just beginning." The air between them grew thick with tension, every breath a struggle, every heartbeat an echo of what was to come. Rylan's stance was unwavering, his body a shield between Aria and the man who had cursed them both, but she could feel the weight of the Alpha's gaze on her, cold, calculating, and filled with a twisted sense of control. Aria swallowed hard, her pulse quickening as the silence stretched between them. She wanted to say something, anything to break the suffocating quiet that had descended on the room, but her words seemed to be trapped somewhere deep inside her. The Alpha's eyes flicked back to Rylan, amusement dancing in the cruel lines of his expression. "You think you can protect her?" he scoffed. "You can't even protect yourself from the curse. It's already here. You've never truly been free, Rylan. And neither has she." Rylan's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides as if he was holding back something primal, something dangerous. "I will fight for her," he said, his voice rough, but steady. "I will fight you until my last breath." The Alpha let out a low chuckle, taking a slow step forward, as if savoring the moment. "You'll need more than that. You'll need her. You'll need the bond." Aria's breath caught in her throat as the truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. The bond, their bond, was their curse. And now it was the only thing keeping them alive. It was the very thing that had brought them together, and the very thing that would tear them apart. "I don't want this," she whispered, though the words felt small, fragile, in the face of everything that was happening around them. "I don't want to be bound by this curse anymore." Rylan's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like the man she had fallen in love with, the man who would do anything to keep her safe. But then, just as quickly, the reality of their situation hit him, and his expression hardened. "We don't have a choice," he said, his voice tight with restraint. "But we can still fight. We can still take control." The Alpha's smile widened at their exchange, as if they were nothing more than toys in a game he had already won. "You think you have a choice, but you don't. You never did. The bond has always been my creation. And now, it will be your undoing." Before Aria could speak again, the room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very walls were closing in on them. The bond, their bond, flared to life, the warmth of it overwhelming her senses. And then, just as quickly, the warmth turned into a burning ache, searing through her chest like a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Rylan reached for her, his fingers brushing against her skin, trying to steady her, but it was no use. The pain was too much. "What's happening?" she gasped, her voice breaking as she fell to her knees, the force of the bond nearly crushing her. The Alpha's voice was low and filled with dark satisfaction. "The curse has found its home. You can't fight it anymore. You never could." Rylan's hand was at her back, pulling her close, but it felt like he was losing his grip on her. His eyes were frantic, his breath shallow as he tried to hold on to her, but the bond between them was shifting, slipping like sand through his fingers. "Aria, please," he pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. "You have to fight it. We can't lose each other." But Aria could barely hear him. The pain was too overwhelming, the bond was too strong. She closed her eyes, trying to block out everything, the Alpha's cruel words, Rylan's desperate pleas, the world that was falling apart around them. But then, something unexpected happened. The pain, the burning ache, suddenly vanished, leaving behind only a deep, bone-deep weariness. Aria opened her eyes to find Rylan hovering over her, his face filled with an expression of shock and relief. "Rylan?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I don't know," he said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It stopped. The bond, it stopped." The Alpha took a step back, his eyes narrowing in fury. "Impossible," he snarled, his voice thick with rage. "You can't just break the bond. You can't just undo what I've done. But Rylan didn't move. He didn't look at the alpha anymore. His eyes were on Aria, and in them, she saw something she hadn't seen before, hope. A flicker of it. We have to finish this, he said, his voice steady, though his body trembled with the weight of everything they had endured. The curse doesn't control us. Not anymore. Aria felt a surge of something powerful, rising inside her. For the first time, the bond didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a choice. It felt like their choice. We're not giving up, she whispered, her voice growing stronger. Not now. Not ever. But the alpha wasn't finished. His eyes flicked between them, a wild, dangerous glint in his gaze. You think you're free? You think you can just walk away from this? Rylan's lips curled into a grim smile. We're not walking away. We're going to end this, once and for all. The alpha stepped forward again, but this time, there was something different in the air. The room felt charged with a strange energy, an undeniable force pulling them all into the final confrontation. The curse, the bond, the love, they were all tangled together now, and the only way out was through. I've fought for you, Rylan said, his voice firm. And I'll fight for us. For what we have. The alpha's eyes darkened. You think you can destroy everything I've built? You think you can just walk away from this? I don't think, Rylan said, his voice low and dangerous. I know. And with that, the room seemed to explode. The fight was more than just a battle of wills. It was a fight for everything they had lost, everything they had gained, and everything that was yet to come. Aria could feel the tension crackling between them, a palpable force that threatened to consume them. But even as the fight raged on, she knew one thing for sure. The curse didn't control them anymore. And as long as they had each other, nothing could tear them apart. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, heavy and taut like the moments before a storm. Aria stood there, her heart racing as she tried to steady herself, trying to believe that what she was about to face was even real. The alpha's presence lingered, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the bond between her and Rylan, the bond that had been severed and mended time and time again. And now, with everything on the line, she didn't know what to expect. The curse, once their enemy, had transformed into something darker, something that bound them in ways that only those who had lived through it could understand. They had fought it, bled for it, and still, it refused to let them go. And now, even with the alpha retreating into the shadows, something more dangerous loomed over them. What do we do now? Aria whispered, her voice trembling as Rylan stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers, filled with the intensity of 1,000 unspoken words. Rylan didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her as if he were seeing her for the first time again, like the weight of the world hadn't shifted between them. She could see it in his eyes, the pain, the loss, the helplessness, and yet, underneath it all, there was something else. Something she hadn't seen before. Hope. We fight, he said finally, his voice low but steady, a soft growl of determination that rumbled in his chest. We finish this. Together. And in that moment, as the words left his mouth, the bond flared. It pulsed beneath her skin, an undeniable force that made her body ache and her heart race. It was a reminder that she couldn't escape, that she couldn't outrun it. It wasn't just the bond that had her trapped. It was her love for him, the depths of it, the way she had always been drawn to him even when she didn't want to be. She wanted to fight it, to push him away, but every part of her, every fiber of her being, screamed for him. And the worst part was, he felt it too. "Rylan," she whispered, stepping closer to him, her voice barely audible in the stillness that surrounded them. "I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can keep going." His face softened at her words, and for a moment, the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders. "You don't have to handle this alone," he said, his voice gentle, but laced with something far deeper. "You never will again. We've come this far, Aria. We can't stop now." She nodded, though the fear still gnawed at her insides, like a cold claw scratching at her heart. She had never been more terrified of anything in her life, not even the day she had first met him. The bond, the curse, it had always been there, pulling them closer together and threatening to tear them apart. And now, it was stronger than ever, a force they couldn't ignore even if they wanted to. But Rylan was right. They had come too far. There was no turning back now. "I don't know if I can break it," she said quietly, her words almost lost in the vastness of the room. "This curse. This bond. It's everything I've ever known, everything I've ever feared." "I don't want you to break it," Rylan whispered, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I want you to accept it. To accept us." Her breath caught in her throat as his words settled deep inside her, the weight of them making her knees weak. She could feel the truth of it, the undeniable pull of the bond. It wasn't something they could fight or resist. It was something they had to embrace. And yet, as she stood there with him, feeling his heart beat against hers, the truth was clearer than ever. The curse wasn't just about the bond. It was about them, about what they could become, what they could build, despite everything that had come before. But even as that realization settled in her chest, there was still one question, one doubt, that lingered between them. Would they be able to survive the consequences of their love? Would the curse tear them apart before they even had a chance to understand what it meant to be together? And just as the thought crossed her mind, the door to the room slammed open, and everything they had built up to this point came crashing down. The door slammed open with a force that rattled the walls, and before either of them could react, a figure stepped into the room. Aria's heart skipped, a jolt of pure instinct racing through her body as her gaze locked onto the person standing in the doorway. The Alpha, the one who had cursed them, wasn't gone. He was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But it wasn't just him this time. Behind him, shadows seemed to swirl, darker than night, an eerie presence that sent a chill through Aria's veins. Rylan instinctively moved closer to her, his body a shield, though Aria could feel the tension in him, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. She could see the way his jaw clenched, the way his fists tightened as the Alpha stepped forward with a slow, deliberate pace. "I told you," the Alpha sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You can't escape me. Not from the bond. Not from your past." Aria's pulse quickened, and she felt the bond flare once more. It burned through her, hot and relentless, reminding her of the curse that had always followed them, that had always been tied to them. The very thing that had kept them apart was now threatening to consume them. And as much as she wanted to fight it, she knew one truth deep down: there was no escaping it. Not without consequences. "I'll make sure you understand," the Alpha said, his eyes cold, calculating. "You think you've broken free, but this bond? It's more than just a curse. It's mine. And now, it's going to destroy you. Rylan's chest rose and fell as he stared at the alpha, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and desperation. I won't let you have her, he spat, his voice low and dangerous, a growl that came from deep within him. I won't let you tear us apart anymore. The alpha laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the room like a taunt. You really believe you can stop me, don't you? He took a step forward, closer, and Aria felt the pressure build in the air. You're just a boy trying to play with forces you don't understand. You're not the alpha here. I am. Her breath caught in her throat, the truth of the words cutting deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The alpha had been pulling the strings all along, weaving his curse into their lives, manipulating them like pawns in a game. And now, it was time for the final move. But as Aria looked at Rylan, standing tall and strong before her, something inside her stirred, hope, and something else, resolve. They had come this far, and they couldn't back down now. The bond might be a curse, but it was also a part of them. And if they had to fight for it, they would. She would. I'm not afraid of you, Aria said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving the alpha's. Not anymore. The alpha's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing, but he quickly recovered, his confidence never wavering. You should be. In the span of a heartbeat, the room erupted into chaos. The alpha lunged, his speed inhuman, and Rylan was there in an instant, his body a blur of motion as he blocked the attack, shoving the alpha back with a force that sent him stumbling. Aria's heart raced as she watched them, the raw power and intensity of their fight crackling in the air like lightning. But it wasn't just a physical fight. This was a battle for their lives, for their future, for everything they had fought for. The curse was here, manifesting in ways they hadn't anticipated, twisting their fate in ways they couldn't control. You think you can defeat me? The alpha snarled, his voice thick with rage. You'll never win. The bond will destroy you both. It's already begun. But Rylan's eyes never wavered. He moved toward Aria, standing between her and the alpha, his presence a fortress. We're not afraid of your curse, he said, his voice hard. We'll break it. Together. Before the alpha could retaliate, Rylan surged forward, tackling him to the ground. The two were locked in a fierce struggle, their bodies a blur of motion, fists colliding with bone, and a growl that echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Aria watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as the battle between them escalated. She knew this fight wasn't just physical. It was everything. Their love. The bond. The curse. And if they didn't break free, if they didn't destroy the alpha's hold on them, they would lose everything. The tension in the room was suffocating, a taut string pulled to its breaking point. Aria felt the bond flare again, stronger now, more powerful than ever before. It was like a burning ache beneath her skin, a call that resonated deep within her soul. She could feel it, Rylan's pain, his determination, his love. And then, in that moment, something changed. The world seemed to pause. Rylan, breathing heavily, looked at her, his eyes wild with urgency. His voice was rough, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Aria, now. We need to end this. Without thinking, without hesitation, she reached for him. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and the connection between them surged like a wave crashing over the shore. The bond pulsed, stronger now, glowing with an intensity that took her breath away. The curse they had feared, the curse that had haunted them, was now a force they could control. Aria's heart raced as she felt the power of their bond shift, turning the tide in their favor. She had always feared the curse. She had always feared losing herself in it, losing everything she had ever known. But now, it wasn't the curse that controlled them. It was them. Together. "We break the curse, now," she said, her voice steady with newfound conviction. Rylan nodded, his breath ragged, but his gaze never leaving hers. Together. And just like that, they joined forces. The power of their bond surged, more alive than ever before, a force that rippled through the room like an unstoppable wave. The Alpha roared in fury as the curse that had bound them for so long shattered into 1,000 pieces, like glass breaking under the weight of truth. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt like the world had reset, the weight of everything lifting. The battle was over. The curse was broken. But as the silence stretched on, the truth of it settled in. Aria and Rylan stood together, their bond stronger than ever, their love undeniable, and yet, they both knew that the road ahead would still be difficult. They had won, but the fight wasn't over. There would always be more battles to face. But for now, they were together. And that was enough. The air felt different now, lighter in a way, as if a storm had passed, leaving only the soft, steady whisper of the wind. Aria stood there, staring at Rylan, her heart still pounding in her chest, but this time it was different. This time, the fear had been replaced by something else, a fragile hope, one that had been buried for so long beneath the weight of their curse. She didn't know what was next, didn't know if the world had suddenly made sense or if it was just the calm before another storm. But standing here with him, after everything they had fought for, there was something undeniably real in the way their bodies felt drawn to each other. Something raw and honest that had never existed before the curse, before the bond had forced them to confront who they truly were. And now, as the silence stretched between them, Aria felt something shift again. Rylan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet of the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Aria didn't want to run. She didn't want to escape. She wanted to stay here, in this moment, forever. But she knew they couldn't. "Do you feel it?" she whispered, her voice trembling just a little as she looked into his eyes, searching for answers that only he could give. Rylan didn't say anything at first, just reached out for her, his fingers brushing her cheek in a soft, almost reverent gesture. He didn't need to speak. His touch was enough. The way his hand lingered, the way his thumb traced the line of her jaw, it told her everything she needed to know. His eyes were full of things he hadn't said out loud, things they both knew but had never allowed themselves to fully understand. She was scared. Scared of what they might face next. Scared of the consequences of their choices. But the fear wasn't paralyzing anymore. It wasn't the only thing she felt. There was something else now. Something that made her feel like she could breathe again, like they could fight whatever came their way, together. "Rylan," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now? What do we do now that the curse is broken?" His eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, the walls between them seemed to crumble. The weight of everything they had been through, the pain, the uncertainty, it all melted away, leaving only the two of them standing in the quiet aftermath. "We live," he said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper. "We live, Aria. And we move forward. We take back what we've lost. Together. She didn't know what it meant yet, but something about his words felt like a promise. A promise she could believe in, no matter how many storms they would face. But even as she looked at him, a new fear crept into her chest. What if they couldn't move forward? What if the damage was too great to repair, even after all the fighting they had done? The bond between them might have been broken, but their past was still there, hanging in the space between them like an invisible thread that neither of them could sever completely. The tension in her chest built, and she could feel the shift in the air. Something was coming. She could sense it, even as she stood there, in his arms, for what seemed like the first time in forever. Before she could say anything else, before she could ask him more questions she didn't want answers to, the door to the room opened again. But this time, it wasn't the alpha standing there. It wasn't anyone she expected. It was Lena. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman who had been her ally, the one who had helped her all those years ago, the one who had fought beside her when no one else would. Lena was standing in the doorway, her face pale, her expression unreadable. Aria's heart sank, and she stepped away from Rylan, the sudden distance between them making her feel like she had been slapped. Something in Lena's eyes told her that the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Lena, Aria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. What are you doing here? Lena didn't answer at first. Instead, she stepped into the room, her gaze flickering briefly between Aria and Rylan, as if she were deciding how much to reveal, how much to risk. Finally, her voice broke the silence, low and heavy with something Aria couldn't quite place. Rylan, Lena said, her eyes narrowing, a sharp edge to her words. There's something you need to know. Something you didn't hear before, something that changes everything. Aria felt the air in the room shift again, this time with something darker, something that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. What was Lena talking about? What had they missed? Rylan took a step toward Lena, his body tense, his eyes locked on hers. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low but filled with an undeniable edge of warning. Lena hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Aria. The curse was only one part of it, she said quietly. But there's more. Something bigger. Something I didn't know, but now, I have to tell you. Aria's heart began to race again. Something wasn't right. What is it? Aria asked, stepping toward them, her body tense. What are you talking about? Lena took a breath, her face grim as she finally looked at Aria. The bond between you two. It wasn't just the curse that kept you apart. There's a power at play here, something deeper than either of you realized. And it's not just between you. It's connected to something older. Something dangerous. Aria's stomach turned. Lena's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with mystery, and yet, Aria could feel the weight of them pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. Rylan's eyes darkened as he turned to face Aria, his expression grave. What does that mean, Lena? What are you telling us? Lena's gaze flickered toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk in, someone who wasn't supposed to hear this. I don't know everything, she said slowly, her voice quieter now. But there's a prophecy, something that ties you two together in a way you don't understand yet. Something that could destroy everything you've fought for. The words hit Aria like a tidal wave, and she felt her knees go weak beneath her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected there to be more. But now, as Lena's words sunk in, she realized with a terrible clarity that the battle they had fought, the fight for their love, was far from over. Rylan's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between Lena and Aria. "What does this prophecy say?" Lena looked down for a moment, almost as if she were steeling herself for what was to come. Then, with a final, resolute breath, she said, "It says that the bond between you two will either save the world, or destroy it." The Alpha's words hung in the air, but they didn't carry the weight they once had. Not anymore. Rylan's hand tightened around Aria's, a silent promise that they were stronger than any curse, any prophecy, any shadow that sought to tear them apart. He didn't need to fight anymore. He didn't need to prove anything. His love for Aria was a force, one that could not be broken, and he knew she felt the same. The Alpha's smug smile faltered as he took in the defiance in their eyes. Aria stood tall, her heart racing but her spirit unwavering. The bond they had fought for, the curse they had shattered, it had all led them here, to this moment, standing side by side in a world that was theirs to shape. And for the first time, Aria felt a sense of peace settle deep within her. The battle was over. They had won. "You've lost," Aria said, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching. "We've broken the curse. We are no longer bound by your prophecy." The Alpha opened his mouth to retort, but the words died on his tongue as he looked at them. His eyes flickered with something like fear, but before he could speak, the bond pulsed between Aria and Rylan, a soft, glowing light that filled the room. It wasn't just a mark anymore. It was a connection that couldn't be denied, a force stronger than anything that had ever tried to tear them apart. "I think it's time for you to go," Rylan said, his voice low but filled with finality. The Alpha hesitated, his eyes lingering on them, but then, without another word, he turned and left. The door closed softly behind him, and the room felt lighter. The tension that had filled the space for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, peaceful silence. They had done it. They had freed themselves. Aria turned to Rylan, her heart in her throat. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "We're free." Rylan nodded, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He reached for her, pulling her close, their foreheads meeting as they shared the moment, the relief, the love that had always been there, waiting to break free. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close as if he could never let go. "We're not just free," Rylan said softly. "We're together. And nothing will ever tear us apart again." Aria closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, the warmth of his body, the strength of his presence. She had always known, deep down, that this was where they were meant to be. She had fought for this love, fought for their bond, and now it was theirs, unbreakable and pure. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a sense of peace settled over them. The world outside could wait. For the first time in so long, they could just be together. In this moment. And that was enough. Days passed, and life began to fall into place. The weight of the curse had been lifted, leaving room for something beautiful to bloom in its place. Aria and Rylan spent their days together, rediscovering the world they had been too afraid to explore before. They traveled, they laughed, they made memories. Every moment was a gift, a chance to build something new from the ashes of their past. The bond between them only grew stronger, deeper as the days went on. Their love became the foundation of everything they built together. They didn't need to speak it aloud, it was understood in the way their hands fit together, in the way their eyes met across a crowded room, in the quiet moments of shared peace. It was a love that had been tested, shaped by fire, but it was also one that had been forged into something unbreakable. One evening, as the sun set behind them, casting a warm golden light over the world, Rylan took Aria's hand and led her to a quiet hill overlooking the land they had claimed as their own. The field stretched out before them, the wind whispering through the trees, the sky painted with shades of pink and orange. It was perfect. He turned to her, his expression soft and full of love. "Aria," he began, his voice low, "I promised you that we would live. That we would take back what we lost. And now, I want to make another promise." Her heart fluttered as she met his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew what was coming, and yet, the anticipation still sent a thrill through her. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said, his voice steady, his words full of conviction. "I want to build a future with you. A future where we're not running from anything, where we're not hiding anymore. Just us. Together." Aria felt the tears sting her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, of relief, of love so deep it filled every corner of her heart. She stepped closer to him, her fingers brushing against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand. She had never known a love like this. A love that was so pure, so all-encompassing, so real. "I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I always have." Rylan's smile was the brightest thing she had ever seen, and in that moment, she knew that nothing could ever break them apart again. They had survived the darkness. They had fought through the pain. And now, they were free to love each other without fear, without hesitation. "I'm going to love you every day for the rest of my life," Rylan said, his voice thick with emotion. And as they stood there, under the setting sun, the world around them felt impossibly perfect. It was a new beginning, a fresh start, and for the first time in a long time, Aria felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. There was no curse anymore. No broken bond. No more fear. Just love. And the future was theirs.